Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dog-Eared Thoughts. I'm Michael, and wanting to share with you a book that I read in January of this year, 2026, and it's stuck with me for quite a bit now in terms of the style, the story, and I wanted to share my thoughts with you. So buckle up and enjoy. The book that I'm going to be talking about today is The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay by Michael, oops, I can't get this up, Chabon. Apologies. Here you go. This is better, right? This is certainly not a new book. It was published in 2000. It was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2001. So it's probably had its day in terms of getting reviewed and lots of different people talking about it. But a friend of mine recommended this, and I finally dug into it. And it is a decently long book. It's over 600 pages. And while I'll say my one critique of the book is that it probably could be at least 100 pages shorter, I will say that the emotion and the complexity in terms of how Michael writes and describes and creates his characters and takes us on this journey is absolutely worth the read. And so going into this book knowing that it may feel a little long in places, but if you are willing to enjoy the characters and follow the characters along, then you're going to absolutely enjoy this book. So to start off, a little bit about the author, Michael Chabon. He was born in D.C. He's traveled quite a lot. Went to school at UC Irvine for his graduate school, and he's definitely written a lot of books. One of his most famous ones is The Wonder Boys, which he wrote in 1995. Which was later adapted into a movie starring Michael Douglas, and I think Tobey Maguire might actually be in it as well. And so, he's definitely not a new author. He's well known, has written quite a few books. But following The Wonder Boys, he immediately jumped into writing Kavalier and Clay and spent pretty much 4 years writing this book. And I would say it absolutely shows in the text in terms of the fact that this is a very personal book for him, and a personal book on a couple different levels. The time frame that it's set in, which is the late 30s into World War II, into the 40s. New York, which is definitely an area that is definitely steeped, and obviously Jewish identity. And then on top of that, the love of comic books, which, Michael kind of talks about the fact that while he was finishing The Wonder Boys, he was moving and happened to find a box of old comics that he had and he had loved, but also remembered his father talking about his life with comic books and growing up, and what would be considered the golden age of comics in the 30s and into the 40s, of where Superman was really taking off and Batman was really starting to take off, and all of those things, and how a lot of immigrants and a lot of other people really looked to comic book characters and superheroes as analogies for their struggles and their lives and how they were taken into account, which is still true today. Comic books have the ability to really take on the persona of the people and be thinly or thickly veiled metaphors or allegories for those kind of situations. And so they are, I would argue, timeless in terms of their storytelling and how they approach themselves. But it was very important to Michael and based on his father. In fact, the book is dedicated to his father. And so that really comes across in the writing, that it's a very personal book, that it's an extremely, a book that he put a lot of love and a lot of factors into and really brought that to point. So all in all, that's really the point of that. The two main characters, which are in the title, right, is Joe or Joseph Cavalier, who, when the story begins, he's being or trying to be smuggled out of Prague in the late 30s. So is his parents and his family, who are Jewish doctors, they see what's coming and they know what's happening in Germany and to fellow Jews in Germany, and they're trying very hard to get him out. And one of the things that Joseph did as a child, he's a teenager, late teenager when we meet him, is that he had studied under a magician, or I would argue kind of an escape artist, who fashioned himself after Houdini. And so initially he tries to leave via train, but as it's passing through Germany, he's turned back around because he apparently doesn't have the right identification or information, which is changing daily, especially for Jews trying to get through Germany. And so he then has to take on the opportunity to leave the country through the east and follow his mentor along and hiding in a coffin of the Golem of Prague, and which is they build in a secret hidden place for him to be secretly transported, and he goes east and eventually makes his way to New York, where his cousins and family, extended family, are living. And that's also how we meet Samuel Clayman, which later becomes Sammy Clay in terms of the story. And he's a little younger than Joe. He's growing up in Brooklyn. His father was a circus strongman who abandoned the family. And so, Sammy has this love of comics and love of superheroes, and he kind of fashions himself thinking that he could be his father, who in the circus was the strong man, the mighty molecule. And so he's trying to very much follow in those footsteps, and he can create the stories. And when Joe arrives and starts living and finds out about this, Joe is the artist that kind of brings those stories to life in a visual medium. And so they come up with the idea of creating a superhero, which they call the Escapist, and come up with those, and then end up selling those ideas to a comic book publisher. And they definitely get kind of bowled over. The agreement that they sign is not very lucrative for them. But it's really lucrative for the publishers, and so not surprising for people that age. But the fact is that it's for them it's an escape, and they're able to get out of the day to day. For Sam, it's a matter of he's able to do what he loves and tell stories and live in that direction. For Joe, it is initially how can I help tell a story about defeating the Nazis, but also then save money to get the rest of his family to the United States. And so that's the context of the beginning of the book, and where we go from there. So the book is broken into 6 parts, and quite frankly, the first 3 almost into 4, first 3 parts or almost 4 parts make up the first half of the book. Again, this is kind of where, if I'm have a criticism of it, could there be potential for those things to be moving faster? Yes. Does it set the groundwork for where the story is going? Also, yes. So there's a little bit of both going into that. And so part 1 is Joe arriving in Brooklyn, Sammy and Sam and Joe kind of coming together with creating their idea and then selling their idea to of the Escapist as a comic book superhero, and getting signed and beginning that process. Part 2 is really showing and skipping a little bit ahead in the future, where they are successful and they're starting to they have friends, and they're starting to kind of move into how do they go through their lives, and expand the comic book world, right? So Joe meets a woman, Rosa, who he, falls in love with. He creates a character that kind of describes her, where and kind of fits into that. Joe also is continually setting aside money and trying to get his family to Prague. He has a brother, his grandmother. They're writing letters. Some of the letters are clearly not saying a lot because they're being read and being thing, but he's still trying very much to kind of figure out how to get them through. And then the part 3 is really where we begin to kind of get a sense of now they're more adults, and they're kind of growing through this book. Sammy is kind of struggling with coming to the reality of the fact that he's gay, and what does that mean for anybody, but especially a person in New York in the beginning of the 1940s. And Joe is continually, again, kind of living in this party atmosphere, living his life, has his friends, still trying to get his family over. And then, personal tragedy strikes towards the end of that and completely changes the direction of Joe and his world at that point. And then, there is a lot of change, and Joe's leaving impacts both Rosa and Sammy and their approach to the world as well. And then finally it kind of wraps itself up into both. It shows what Joe's doing during the war, where he ends up in a very, very remote part of the world, in kind of an Arctic station, and kind of how does he joins the war effort in order to fight the enemy, but is he also escaping his life and everything that goes along with that? So there's a lot of both of those things, and he ends up even further away. And then how does he reintegrate into his world in the final sections, along with the fact that from a historical standpoint, the culture is shifting in terms of how the world is viewing, or at least how America is viewing these superhero characters, and are they propaganda for gay subculture or communism, and all of these other things that are going through, and suddenly they have to defend the fact that they wrote all these wildly successful comics at earlier times. So all of those things kind of bring about the end of the book and where that goes. So it's absolutely a very long trek, and it's very character driven. Yes, there's plot points, and it to get us from year to year and across the years, but it's very character driven and digs deep into that realm. From a standpoint of looking at some of the themes of the book, obviously a lot of that is superheroes and how do they factor into the culture. So there's definitely a lot of when you look at Superman as a character, he's an immigrant, different. He comes to this world and has obviously has superpowers to that, but how does he fit in or try to fit in and fight the evil in there? All of those kind of things are subtextual within this part of the book, where you have these two cousins who are Jewish, knowing what's going on in Europe, trying to find their way, especially for Joe, who has really no immediate family in this country, in America, finding their way through that, and how they kind of push and throw their lives into creating. A lot of their focus, especially early on, is having their escapist beat up Nazis, and the publisher is pushing back on that, saying, "Well, we're not in the war yet," and this was obviously before we joined the war. People don't want to read about that yet, But then obviously once we join the war, it's absolutely can punch out Hitler, with this. So all of those things are kind of described in those ways, as well as what is considered art, right, and commerce and all of those things that is are comic books art. At the time they're looked at as more kid friendly. That's the people who are buying them. It's about the kids are buying them. Is this really? But yet there's a lot of great art and storytelling that can be told in these superhero stories that have these extra meanings to them and different layers to them that can't be necessarily maybe told outright in other forms and other mediums. But also, the capitalist nature of what is considered good, and you see them working with their company and fighting through what stories make it, what stories don't. Is this copying another comic? And we can't put that in there. All of those things that are absurd in a lot of ways, but also the kind of the business aspect of it as well, right? And so it's definitely a realistic piece to that. And then you have Joe, who as a person who did escape, but obviously loses all his family, or at least loses contact with all of his family through the horrors of the war and Holocaust and everything that happened in Europe at that time. Kind of living with the reality of being a survivor and maybe the only one. And how does that impact him in those stories as well? One of the other themes that it hits really well, especially with Sammy, is friendship, relationships. Obviously, for Sammy, it's a man who can't really be who he wants to be in this world. He, as a gay man in the late 30s, early 40s, it's very much pretending or hiding what that is. Obviously, he has his own relationship that kind of factors into that, but then how that ends and kind of how he ends up with having to defend his lifestyle at the end of the day, when the government is holding these hearings about whether or not comic books are hidden homosexual agendas of like, the sidekick is a partner to the main superhero, like Batman or Robin or someone like along those lines, right? Now these hearings did really occur the back then, and that was a real conversation that took place in the newspapers and in hearings in Washington and things like that. And so, it adds a level of historical significance to it, but at the same time, also from a standpoint of Sam's approach to life, having almost all of the book where he's hiding from himself, at the end, is he going to be able to embrace or find a way to be who he could be? And does that mean perhaps, going somewhere or finding a different approach, and does that mean leaving his comic book dreams behind? And that's that gets resolved towards at the very end of the book, or towards the very end of the book. So you have you really get to follow him around and kind of see how he struggles with that, and how he finds fun and life and joy in not only his work but his friends and relationships, but also how he also has to hide a lot of that as well. As I said, this is obviously a very personal story for Michael Chabon, and he absolutely does his research, and he notes this in the acknowledgments at the end, in terms of how does he blend what was going on in New York and in the world at the time, and how these characters wove themselves into all of that. And I think it's important to, if anything, also allows us as a reader to then go off and find out what was going on in that world, and kind of digging in a little bit more. Even if you're not a comic book lover, or you're not a World War II lover, there's a lot of things that are going on that allows you to kind of build into what is what's what is going on and what's the historical fiction or literary fiction in this. And I would think it also builds into this is that from a novel standpoint, a history standpoint, it puts you into that place and allows you to kind of feel the emotions or potentially some of the emotions that everyone was feeling at that time, especially people who are struggling in that regard, and whether they're gay or they're an immigrant or Jewish at the time of World War II, and all of those things that go along with that. Now to talk a little bit from a criticism or kind of talk about parts of the book that that I struggled with, and that when you read some of the reviews and different thoughts on the book are kind of generally thought of in terms of this book. Definitely, as I said, there's a little bit of a pacing and definitely a length problem, or not problem, but a concern where does it go on a little too long to get from, especially in the meat of the book, does it take a little too long to get to the resolution part or the third act, so to speak? I think, again, if you are able and willing and find yourselves in love with these characters and following these characters along, you may not find it that way. But I could certainly see where people have felt that. And I did, myself kind of feel about once I hit the halfway point, really kind of wanting to know where are we going, and how quickly is what's the next thing that's going on. The very first third of the book or first quarter of the book goes by very fast, and then it kind of goes into a different gear on that regard. And another factor of it is definitely the non-main characters, so not Kavalier and Clay, are not very deep. They are, and especially the women in there, while certainly Rosa being kind of the main significant female figure in this, it's I would say she's probably something of a device that brings the main characters together or keeps them apart, or all of the above, and kind of it would be good to get a little bit more of her background and kind of dig into and kind of get a little bit more about that. She certainly is a strong enough figure in her own right in the book, but there's definitely opportunities there to maybe expand upon that a little bit more. And while I certainly wouldn't say that it's just long to be long, it certainly has. One of the things that I think is positive about Chabon's writing style is that and I'm kind of I'm the person who loves reading words, and people and authors who love to use the right words to describe, to walk you through and really put you in those places. That's not a bother for me. I know obviously there are people who might find that tedious in some ways or shape or form. So yeah, after all that, would I recommend it? Absolutely. I would say that if you are someone who really loves and goes into books with emotion and great prose and love language, you're going to love this. It's definitely there's highs and there's super lows, and it's absolutely a book that you can get lost in, and I think that is really huge. When this came out, it absolutely, you can see why it won the Pulitzer, for that, because it's just one of those seminal books, that you can latch onto and kind of continue to read, and probably read multiple times and get different things out of that. And if anything, that's one of those great parts of a book, is when you can reread it and feel like you're still discovering parts about it and different things about that as well. If you're a comics person, if you jump, if you're a lover of Jack Kirby or any others, go for it. I think you'll find some interesting things about that, and also learning. If anything, it might be a gateway into the history of comics if you don't already know that, or digging into why there were hearings about them, all of those things. Definitely if you're looking for the first half, absolutely builds into the second half, and I think it moves faster in the second half, and I think you find yourself enjoying that a little bit more. So overall, absolutely recommend it. I think you can put this on your TBR. If again, it's not a new book, but maybe that's now 20 something years later. It can be rediscovered, and I think that's the beauty of it. So absolutely recommend reading it, and I can't say enough good things about it. So that's going to do it for our episode here at Dog Eared Thoughts. If you read this one, whether recently or a while ago, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you thought, especially kind of the wartime piece of it, or comic piece. Definitely, hey, tell me what, if you love the golden age of comics, anything, any specific comics that jump out at you and you'd love to know more about that. If you're new here, my previous episode was what I read in February of 2026, so feel free to jump into that, and I will absolutely be back with another episode. So feel free to hit subscribe and like, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks.